One of my sister's friends attempted to rape me. My childhood didn't start out very good. At 3 years old, my dad died. I cried for days. My mom was pregnant with a fourth kid and miscarried at the funeral. And I started acting out until the age of 12, when the courts gave my mother a choice of either sending me to a military school or they were going to send me to reform school. So at 12 years old, my mother took me from New Jersey and drove me to New York City, put me on a train alone, to go from New York to Virginia to a military academy where I spent 3 years there being severely abused. The headmaster was homosexual, and he was coming on to me left and right and took me on a camping trip with other boys, and I saw what he was doing, and I vomited. He'd be watching me as I was coming out, and he'd wink at me and stuff like that, and then he brought me in his office. "Aren't you with any of the boys here?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "Well, I hear from your roommate that you have an affection for him and not me. And that's not fair because I'm the one that can give you things. If you don't tell me, I'm going to spank you." So he made me pull my pants down, bend over his desk, and he took a paddle and started hitting me until I would confess that I was having an affair with my roommate or any kid in the school, and I wouldn't do it. I'd have gone down bleeding to death before I did that. And that's when one of the cadets who was in his little circle said, "Look, John, stop this with it. We have a group that goes camping. It's a lot of fun. We get to go swimming and stuff. There's a very small group, and he would like to include you." I said, "Yeah, but I'm not into that other stuff." He goes, "No, don't worry about that. Just go on, and we'll figure it out." And the first night there, I was looking out, beautiful moon across the lake in the woods. I thought, this is really nice. And then the shadow of him pushing a young boy down and obviously having an affair with him, I jumped in my sleeping bag, zipped it up over my head, and I just made sure that nobody was going to get in my bag. When we left there, I went to his office and said, "Look, I'm not into this stuff, so if you want to play games with it, go ahead, beat me, do whatever you want, but I don't want anything to do with it." I said, "And besides that, I'm going to tell my mother what you've been doing, because she doesn't believe it, but I'm going to tell her again." He says, "Hold on." And he pulls out a piece of paper and he has me read it. And it's a document that says, "By admissions and letting your son into this military academy, you are giving us permission to discipline him in any way we see fit to military standards." That night I ran away again, called my mother and said, "Did you sign that paper?" She said, "They wouldn't let you in unless I signed it. And besides, it wasn't that bad, right?" And I told her everything. She goes, "Why do you always exaggerate these things?" I said, "Mom, I am not exaggerating it. They're beating me. They're going to kill me if you keep me in here." She goes, "You're over-exaggerating. I've already called the colonel. Where are you? He's going to come get you." So he picked me up. Sure enough, took me to his office. I got beat again and sent to bed. And then after that, he decided to leave me alone because I was just too much trouble for him. I wasn't going to cooperate. I lived in fear. Absolute fear that somebody was going to come in and sexually abuse me, or the headmaster was going to try another play at me. And I didn't sleep very well for 3 years. And no child at that age, or any age, no human should live in fear every night for their survival. And that's what it was like. It was pretty ugly. And then for 3 years down there, it was horrible. And I finally told my parents, "Look, I can't go back after 3 years. I just will not do it. And if you send me back, I'm going to jump off the train and you'll never see me again." So they agreed to putting me in a private school. And the first day I'm sitting in private school thinking, "Oh, thank God I can finally have some air and not have all this abuse that I was going through." And this 6'3" guy came up to me and said, You callous?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You're the guy that went to military school." And I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "Did they teach you how to kill?" I said, "Well, they teach a lot of things. Killing, of course, but it's not a skill I'm proud of or anything." And he said, "Stand up. I want you to kill me." And I said, "Look, I really don't want any trouble. I just want to do, my schoolwork, be left alone. I'm not interested in fighting." And for 3 years, he bullied me, basically, spit on me, pushed me around because I refused to fight him. And I would go to the headmaster and all my teachers and say, "Look, I know my temper. If I lose it, I'm not going to be responsible for the results. Please take him off my back." And so they tried and he still refused. And then at 15 years old, while I was there, I just felt like I can't do this anymore. The insecurities, the lack of compassion, no place to talk, nobody to love in a sense or be loved by, drove me to walking to the edge of a dock by a partially frozen lake, and I jumped in. And water started rushing into my lungs, and the thought hit me that I didn't want to die. There has to be something better. So I crawled my way back out and went to my dorm and warmed up. A couple of days later, the soccer coach came up to me and said, "Why aren't you playing sports?" I said, I don't do sports." He goes, "Well, didn't your dad teach you any sports or anything?" And he could see it on my face. He goes, "Tell me what happened." So he got it out of me and convinced me to become a soccer player. And once that started, then my chemistry teacher bribed me. He said, "You want to do well in chemistry?" I said, "Sure." He goes, "I'm the wrestling coach. I want you to wrestle." Okay, we'll make that trade. And then I became a hockey player as well. Final year there, I was nominated as captain, co-captain of the soccer team. And this kid stood up and said, no, he can't even stand up for himself. I don't want him as a captain on our team. And I snapped. I said, anytime, anywhere, you just name it. And he said, no. So he hit me. I went down. I got back up. He hit me. I went down. I got back up. The third time he hit me, I went down. And then my mind just snapped. I kind of blanked in a sense, and I went into survival mode, and I kicked him where it really hurt and got him on the ground and started digging my fingers behind his eyes. I was going to kill him. I really wanted to rip his eyes out. And the coach and whole team dragged me off of him, and I went to my room, and I'm sitting there thinking, I just blew 3 years. I had a dedication to peace and nonviolence, and I lost it. And I was really ashamed of myself. The coach came in. He said, you got to come back to the field. I said, I'm really sorry, coach. I shouldn't have said anything. I shouldn't have done. He goes, no, you don't understand. The whole school, including the headmaster, were cheering for you. And I looked at him. I said, that's just plain sick. He says, what do you mean? I said, do you realize what you're saying to me? You're saying that nobody can manage this, and the only way I could prove my self-worth was to get in a fight and use physical violence. I just don't understand this kind of world. He said, well, I understand what you're saying, but the whole team, including your friend, just voted unanimously. So I went back up on the field, and I played and became very good, became undefeated in wrestling, and one of the best defensemen in ice hockey. So then I went to a school in Massachusetts, a college, and I discovered the peace movement. I got very deeply involved in it, started going to SDS meetings and Black Panther meetings, and got pretty heavy into the politics and all of it, but I still didn't feel comfortable with who I was. And one day, my chemistry teacher came up to me, and he says, take a walk with me. I said, okay. He said, John, you do chemistry labs in 45 minutes when other students take 3 hours, and you do them perfectly. He says, you also have an amazing mind for this, but you're not a chemist. I said, what do you mean I'm not a chemist? In fact, I get an A in your class. You just told me how good it was. He goes, yeah, but you're not the guy with the pocket, with the pens and all that. What's going on with it? And I told him honestly, I said, look, my dad died of cancer, and I want to be the scientist that cures it. He says, I thought it was something like that. It's very noble, but you're out of my class. I said, what do you mean I'm out of your class? He said, I already talked to the academic department. We're switching you out of chemistry. You got to find something else. You're doing it for the wrong reasons. You need to understand that you are a creative person. I see it. All your teachers see it. You don't see it, but I see it. So you're out. So I'm sitting on the grass, and my African-American friend Liz comes up to me and says, what's going on? I said, I just got thrown out of chemistry. She goes, but you're so good at this. Can you help me? I said, yeah, sure. Now, I thought she meant like move furniture or help her move something. And she takes me into the theater, and I said, what am I doing here? She said, I need somebody to just read lines. I said, no. I'm not an actor. It's not going to happen. And she said, oh, come on, don't be a sissy. Just go ahead and do it. I said, okay, Liz, for you, I'll do it because I love you. So I'm on stage, and about an hour into this reading, I turned to the director and I said, listen, I got to go because I got to go do my homework. He goes, you can't leave a rehearsal. And I looked at Liz, and I said, a rehearsal? He goes, yeah, you're the leading role in this play. You've got to stay for rehearsal. So at the end of the first day of rehearsal, the cast came around me and said, hey, you did a great job. Where'd you learn how to act? I said, I did. This is my first moment on the stage. And they all applauded and pat me on the back. And Liz said, told you. I was just so conflicted. I thought, wow, I actually met a group of people that made me feel good. Maybe this isn't such a bad place to be. So I started working in the theater, and my second year I wrote a play that got performed for Parents' Weekend, and so I got the bug. Then the school closed down because of all the riots and everything, and I went to New York to a counselor, and he introduced me to a program called the University Without Walls, and that was in a school in Colorado. And then he said, oh, I'm okay with that. He goes, well, there's a caveat. I said, what's that? He goes, the school's just turning co-ed. And I know one of your requirements is you didn't want to be in an all-boys school because you've been in there since 6th grade. I said, that's correct. He goes, well, there's going to be 800 women and only about 30 guys. I said, where do I sign? I was really socially awkward because going back a little bit, right around 11-ish or so, one of my sister's friends attempted to rape me. It left a lot of mental scars and unresolved ideas about my masculinity, and without a father and sent off to military school, I really didn't have a model. There I am in Colorado, and I'm thinking, okay, keep calm. You can hit the reset button. Nobody knows you. You can be any character you want. Pretend this is a play and just work through it. So I get my books, and I sat down over the weekend and read the entire book of the theater book that I was going to be taught. And about a week into class, I didn't know it, but the head of the department was sitting in the back, and the teacher started talking, and he said, "Does anyone have anything to say?" And I raised my hand. He said, "Yes, Mr. Callis, what do you want to say?" I said, "What you're saying is really not accurate." And he said, "What do you mean? I've been teaching this for 15 years, but and he went off on me. I said, "Well, what you're saying in chapter 3 is contradicting exactly what you're saying in chapter 15. He goes, "How do you know what's in chapter 15? I said, "I read the book over the weekend." He said, "You read the entire textbook over the weekend?" I said, "Yeah, why? Is that normal?" And he says, "No." I said, "Well, whatever it is, you're doing it wrong." He says, "If you're so smart, why don't you teach a class?" I said, "Well, I think I could do a better job than you are." He said, "All right, we'll have to talk about this." So I walk out of class thinking, oh boy, there you go with your mouth again. And Judith came up and said, "Do you have a minute?" And I looked and I went, oh dear. I said, I have to apologize. I didn't mean to mouth off. I'll apologize to the teacher. She goes, "No, you don't understand. I've been waiting 10 years for somebody to finally give it to her. And I'm really proud of you for standing up." Now I'm really confused. I'm thinking, what's going on with my life? I don't get it. And she said, "Come on, let's talk about this program at the University Without Walls." Colorado to me was one of the major turning points in my life. I met a guy named Mark O'Brien who was so spiritually evolved that to this day I'm still in awe of who this man was. And he sat down and he said, "Do you want to learn how to play chess?" I said, "Sure." And what he did was he taught me life's lessons on a chessboard. He says, "Look, there's strategies. Sometimes you have to give up a piece to gain a piece. Sometimes you have to think about, if you move here, what is your opponent going to do and what does that affect?" He said, "That's what life's all about. So tell me what life is about for you." And so I told him the story of my father and everything. And he said, "We're going to work on this, but I'm going to tell you something you really need to hear." I said, "What's that?" He goes, "You don't need to forgive anybody." I said, "Meaning?" He says, "You need to learn to forgive yourself." And it was such a monumental moment. I have used that as a mantra through my life. He also told me that he was going to die by getting killed by lightning. And I thought, okay, Mark, maybe whatever you I'd like to try. And when I was in Summerstock, I got a call that he was outside his house amongst 100, 200-foot ponderosa pines, and a lightning bolt went around a pine tree and hit him in the chest and killed him. It gives me chills every time I tell that story. Because I had worked in professional theater, I got accepted to Occidental College in California. Then I took a secondary class in filmmaking, and it was done by a very well-known woman documentarian called Chick Strand. And so one of the chores was we had to make an 8mm film and present it to the class. So I presented it to the class, and she took me aside after the class and said, "I know you want to be an actor, but you've got such a good eye. You can either be a director of photography or a director. I really think you need to go in that direction." Within a 5-year program, he had me graduating with a master's in 2 years. And when I went up on stage, he and I were shaking hands a lot longer than the other student, and he just smiled like a father almost, And I was really proud. And then from there, I started meeting people, and I got to be in the art department on a shoot. And then from there, I started working in the prop department. And then somebody asked me if I'd like to be an assistant director on a feature film. And I thought, yeah, sure. My journey with my career really culminated in that I didn't get pigeonholed in any one thing. I wasn't commercials, I wasn't music video. I was straight across the boards, and I was known as the guy who could fix anything, troubleshoot anything. Give me a problem, and I can fix it. Because of that, I developed a great reputation, and then my production company started moving along, and then I decided I didn't want a production company anymore, and went freelance again, and started directing and more producing, and it just led me to a very successful and happy career. I think what got me interested in mental health more than anything is when I realized that my life experience had taken me from a complete depressed kid that attempted suicide to a successful person. I thought I felt an obligation to help other people. And that's when I wrote my memoir, When the Rain Stops, to first do a cathartic deep dive into my life and understand what happened and why it happened. There was nothing in my early stages of mental health, so I had to figure stuff out on my own. But along the way, I realized that there were so many mentors that helped me that I didn't even realize they were helping me and mentoring me. And all of them seemed, at some level, to push me towards the creative field as opposed to chemistry that I was trying to get into. So I've been on Fox, Articles Fox, Yahoo Finance, the Good Men's Project, and all these things. And I started writing articles, and then I've been on TV and tons of podcasts. and helping people resolve their mental health issues, or at least give them a chance to recover from it. And I developed a process called Uncover, Discover, and Recover. And simply put, you uncover the situation you are currently facing. You discover whether or not your perception of the truth of that situation is the right truth, or is there an alternative truth? And then you recover by taking the necessary steps to move yourself forward. We all have different traumas. Mine was from my dad dying, sexually abused, suicide. First thing is you have to recognize you have a problem. Second thing you have to recognize is that you have to be willing to ask for help. And you have to understand that help is there to help you move towards recovery. It's not going to come overnight, but you have to start delineating in the morning when you wake up, am I having a depressive episode, or am I just going to have a crappy day today? And sometimes it's just you have a bad day. But if you wake up every morning after morning after morning and you're still depressed, you need to start finding help from a professional health practitioner. Sexual abuse is running rampant in this country. There are predators out there that will find weak people and take advantage of them, but leaving us with the scars, both men and women. When that happens, the first thing that usually comes up for an abused person is to withdraw and never talk about it again. And then they have all sorts of sexual hang-ups. Somebody tries to grab your hand on a date and you say, no, don't touch me. It just doesn't end, and for me, it was like girls were trying to get close and I wouldn't let them anywhere near me, basically, because I just didn't trust it anymore. So my advice is that I lived in a different era than we have today. There are multiple ways of getting help. There are multiple ways of getting through these things. I'm not saying that it's going to come easy. I'm not saying it's going to happen overnight, this wild fantasy after that. But you can learn to have a very healthy life when you find the right person to trust. And to me, that's what it's all about, is trust. I've been married a little over 30 years, and I don't ever recall trusting another human being as much as I trust my wife. So when she says something to me, I listen very carefully because I know she has my best interest at heart, and I can trust what she says. What's important in this scenario is that you don't have to learn to forgive your attacker. You have to learn to forgive yourself. And if you can forgive yourself, you can start to let it go and get professional help. This is something that is beyond the scope of talking to friends and stuff. You need professional help and seek it and talk about it. That once you start talking about it, the wave of emotions and all of what's really hurting you will come out, and then you'll have a path to recovery. Guys, we have never been taught to talk about our emotion. It is not a weakness to have emotions. If anything, it becomes an attractive quality to a woman who's stable. If you're having trouble expressing yourself, seek therapy or some form of help, because without it, you're going to stay locked inside, and that's going to eat away at you, and it's not going to make you healthy. So take out a piece of paper and say, okay, this is a blank page. What do I want my life to look like? How do I want my life to be reshaped so that this trauma that I'm suffering can be uncovered and then dealt with so I have a path to recovery? And the only thing you can do is to take that first step and recognize that there's something that's hurting you and seek help and try to make some steps towards recovery. Learn to talk about it. Don't be afraid.